All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Rick Nordwald. I'll be moderating today's discussion on a real hot topic that I'm sure a lot of you are wondering a lot about, and that's the topic of tariffs. Before we get into the presentation, just a couple of things I want to point out. One, this presentation is intended for informational purposes. It doesn't constitute legal advice. We recommend that anybody listening in consult your own advisors, legal counsel, et cetera, for advice regarding your specific situation. But we're going to be sharing a lot of information with you here today. Steve, we can go to the next slide. Pleased to introduce the speakers today. Again, I'm Rick Nordwald. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Growth Operators. I'll be the moderator. Got a couple of very smart folks as it relates to tariffs and many other things besides, frankly. But Steve Rosen is joining us. Steve's a good friend of our firm. Steve is the founder of Flywheel Sourcing, and tariffs have been a real hot topic within our business, doing what we do. And over the conversations I've had with numerous folks that are knowledgeable on this topic, I've yet to run into anybody that is more knowledgeable or more current on what's going on in the tariff world than Steve. So pleased to introduce Steve. And then also my colleague, Ron Hornbaker. And Ron's an operating partner here at Growth Operators, but in his past career has been the CEO of two different companies where they did a lot of global sourcing. And so Ron has a lot of practical insights from the standpoint of his background as well that we'll be sharing. Steve, we can go on to the next slide. So quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to be talking really about three things. First, Steve's going to provide us an overview of the challenges that are affecting businesses in this dynamic and literally constantly changing, not just by the week, not just by the day, but sometimes by the hour landscape that we're living in. Two, Ron's going to talk about practical strategies that companies can use in building in resilience in the light of that tariff uncertainty. And then I'll be bringing it home for providing some insight into what you can do about it now, so you're better prepared to deal with the uncertainty that all of us are facing. A quick administrative point, we're going to leave time at the end of the presentation for questions, but at the bottom of your screen, if you have a question and you want to make sure you don't forget to ask it at the end of the presentation, just click the Q&A button, type in your question, and we'll log it in, and we'll do our level best to get to everyone's questions here at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve from Flywheel Sourcing.
Great. Well, thank you very much. A little bit about me and Flywheel. So we're located here in Minneapolis. We have a tremendous amount of resources overseas. And so that's why this topic is so relevant to us. We do quite a bit of product development and sourcing in Southeast Asia, predominantly with over 500 people on the ground there, dealing with all sorts of different facets from merchandising and engineering, product development, quality control, and so forth. So we're living and breathing this every day with offices in China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, and such. So this is very near and dear to our heart. So that's a little bit about us. And I think this quote from Winston Churchill in 1942 probably sums up what I believe we are now. And I don't think we're at the beginning, and I don't think we're at the end, but maybe we're at the end of the beginning on this. I think that, we've all been around the roller coaster so far. And, sometimes I feel like I need to say, well, from the time we start this presentation to the time we end this presentation, it could even be different. But today I'm just going to walk you through a variety of different updates and thoughts, starting from very basic into, building supply chain resilience. So without further ado, let's talk about what a tariff even is. And a lot of people get terminology mixed up. So the easiest way to think about it is the tariff is a rate, the duty is a cost, and it's based on the commercial invoice or customs value. So in your mind, if you think the tariff is the percent of cost applied to a product, the duty is the dollars that are paid, And that's all based on the customs value that is assigned to the product when it comes in. So you'll hear a lot of people reverse those and talk about the duty rate or the tariff costs, but that's really what it is. And just know that as you're thinking about this kind of basic 101 stuff. And what I wanted to demonstrate here, and I want to take you back as an example. So imagine you have a synthetic rubber dog toy, and imagine before the first China pause in tariff. So we'll say this is coming out of China, and it was at 145% tariff rate at that time. So let's just say, for example, this dog bone was $1 cost, and just the tariff rate on the product alone 4.3%. And then during Trump's first administration, there was what was called the Section 301 tariff. And depending on your product, it could be anywhere from 0 to 25%. This dog bone, luckily, it didn't have an additional tariff, so zero there. And then add in the 145% before the pause. So that means now, if you do the math, that dollar product cost is now roughly $2.50. That is a huge change to the product. And we're not even talking about the logistics side. We're just talking about the cost from the factory plus the tariff. Now, what did it mean when the pause happened? Well, at that point, when that pause was brought down to 30% using the same modeling, it went from 250 to 134. So even that is a significant cost increase. And you'll see this puts pressure across the supply chain. So we'll get into more of that, but this gives you a feel for what does this dollar product become based on the environment we're living in right now. Okay, moving on from there, what impact is this creating on companies? And there's really four key places that we see it. And not surprisingly so, you can imagine that this is putting pressure on companies' margins. So if you're the importer of record and you're selling to your customers here, your customers aren't going to love the idea of taking price increases. Of course, they're going to push back. You as a company are going to do what you can to try to mitigate that. You might absorb some of it. You might absorb all of it, depending where you are and what you can do. But clearly, it creates that environment where companies are going to have to look at how to tighten margins and try to absorb that as they're trying to keep that end customer happy. The other thing that it does is, particularly at 145%, which was essentially almost an embargo, some of those costs get passed on to the customers, and meaning the company may be selling to the end customer. So as you're seeing now, to some extent, retail pricing will increase. If you can't absorb all of that and you don't have other strategies to help mitigate that, then one of the solutions is I have to charge a higher price to you. So you're going to see some retail pricing going up as we already have. The third thing that certainly can happen is, well, if I'm losing margin here, then how am I going to recoup it and try to maintain my bottom line? So what you're going to see is people are looking at their budgets and where can they save cost in other places to help that bottom line. That might be in research and development, innovation, marketing, all the different other departments that you can lower budgets on to help offset that. And then unfortunately, but in reality, some companies just simply can't absorb it, can't survive, can't pass on the pricing, and companies can go out of business. So these are the ways that we are seeing this environment right now. We're going to talk more about this, but these are four key spots that we're seeing.
Steve, as you're talking about, surviving this and planning for it, I suspect that given the lead times that come into play when you're importing products, and you're certainly the expert on this, I'm not, but I suspect that the tariff rate in place at the time that the product enters the port in the U.S. is the tariff rate you're going to end up paying. So I can imagine that's creating a bit of chaos as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting on that point. It's a really good comment in that it depends. So if you look at the most recent pause with China, the extension of the 90 days, what you're seeing is that typically those tariff rates apply when you clear customs in the United States. But sometimes the verbiage and the writing is you need to leave the country of production on the final voyage. So this is where you really need to do your homework and understand that timestamp. Because a 90-day pause, it's not that much time. And if it is a situation where I need to clear customs in the US, then you have to account for all that logistics time. In this case, on the most recent pause, you get the extra time that if it's on the final journey, the vessel has departed the port of the country.
So it sounds like doing your homework is really important based on that, because given your rubber dog toy example, it can mean an 86% difference in what it costs you to buy that product.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that being proactive and
Hmm.
thinking ahead and thinking, is this the last time we're going to see something like this? It's really important now to start thinking about how am I going to build a more resilient supply chain?
Great advice.
Okay. All right, where are we now? This is always a fun part of the presentation because there is a lot that has happened. And I'm not going to cover all of it because we don't have 5 days here, but I want to cover some of the key things. So I'm gonna really start from when, the Trump administration came back in. We call it T2. T1 is the first administration, T2 is the second. But I'm going to take these next 3 slides and I'm going to run through this. So what you found is very quickly after coming back into office, there were tariffs applied to China, Mexico, and Canada. Shortly after that, there were tariffs applied on aluminum and steel. And that wasn't country specific. That was any aluminum or steel coming in from outside of the United States. And then we probably all remember April 2nd, Liberation Day, as it was called. And that's when the reciprocal tariffs were announced. Shortly after that, now we're at April 9th, from April 2nd, there was a 90-day pause on all the countries except for China. Okay, so we're not that far into it. Keep going. So then what's happening is there's the start of the tariff war with China, ultimately getting us to that 145%, which really stopped a lot of shipments. And a lot of people may not know this, but there's something called de minimis. And there was a de minimis exemption. And what that meant is that if you were shipping in a shipment that was under $800, then you weren't subject to all these fees. That was also something that ended through this for China first. And now, the end of this month, kind of for everybody. And part of the rationale is there were so many shipments coming in over, increasing so quickly, particularly companies that are trying to sell the US market and shipping direct to customer. So that exemption going away. Then you have the meeting in Geneva where you have Scott Bessent and Jameson Greer from the US government meeting with the China counterparts, and that 145% on May 14th, then it was dropped down to 30, which opened the supply chain back up to an extent. You also had de minimis being affected there as well. Now, the de minimis was first set at you either can choose to pay 120% of the value of that shipment, or you can pay $100 going up to June. When the pause happened, then the de minimis rate went down to 54%, and they held up on any increases after the 100. Okay, so now we're in May, right? We started in February. We've gotten to May. This isn't everything, but it's a lot. And now let's talk about more things that went on. So the 25% increase on steel and aluminum was increased to 50%. Then we hear an announcement that there's a trade deal done with China at 55%. Now, the details are still obviously being worked out, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but there wasn't a huge amount of detail behind that. On July 9th, everybody but China's pause was to end. That was extended to August 1st. And we're going to talk more about this very quickly. So we now know what those country rates are because we are past the August 1st. What was interesting about this, and this is why, again, you need to do your homework and you need to be keeping abreast on what's going on. Even though it ended on August 1st, it wasn't enacted till August 7th. And days matter here, particularly days matter, and when the timestamp of what applies to you on the rate matters. And then I think we all saw this most recently in the last 48 hours that the China pause was planned to end at the end of 8/12 and now has been extended another 90 days. So the timestamp on China now is November 10th at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. We'll see what happens as we get closer to it, but that's a lot. That is a lot of change in a short period of time.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. And Steve, frankly, I don't know how you keep up with all of this, and I'm just glad you do. I think this falls into the category of don't try this at home.
Very, very much so. And I think the other thing to note is that it's a little different right now where the news comes out first talking about deals and then you get the details of it. It used to be like things would get worked out and you'd hear the details. So I would caution anybody from just trusting the news. I feel like I can listen to different sources and hear different things all the time, but really it becomes official when it's published in the Federal Register or you see an executive order. Until then, it's a moving part. And quite honestly, you hear about different deals happening, China included, but we need to know the details. We need to see the final outlook of what that really comes to be once it's out in the Federal Register and such. So keeping an eye on the Federal Register is a really good idea right now.
Great advice.
Okay. All right. Moving on, let's go back to August 1st for a minute. Three major things we know from August 1st. And think of that, that's everybody but China when that pause ended. We knew that Canada was at 35% rate. We knew that we now have all these rates for other countries. And we now know that the de minimis exemption was extended to all countries outside of the United States that are shipping in. So as you look at this, and I'm going to show you Annex 1 and some highlights of it on the next slide, keep this in mind that now that is no longer on pause and we have more information. That's not to say a deal can't be done. That's not to say that things can't change. And so these countries that have a rate on this slide, and these are just some, there were 70 countries. This is where we are today. But if they make a deal, that might go down. If something else goes wrong, it might go up. So I think that we're always going to be in a liquid environment here, but this is certainly a lot more concrete than we were during the pause when we really didn't know what was going to happen. So, as you focus kind of more on Southeast Asia, what we found is predominantly we're in that, 19 to 20% range there. And this isn't the total. You still have the product duty itself, or the product tariff rate itself, and you still have Section 301. This 30%, or these percents are comprised, I'm sorry, the 2019s, these are comprised generally of reciprocal and IEEPA.
So Steve, you've got 10 companies here, or 10 countries here rather. Are these now, when you say confirmed, are these tariff rates that we can rely on and take to the bank, as they say, or are they confirmed for now?
I would say confirmed for now. So if they come back and want to create a new deal, then that can change this. Take, for example, India right now, because this is a really interesting one. India has a 25% rate plus a penalty. That penalty has been described as 25% because they're buying Russian oil. So I believe personally that there's not an end date to these. Like the 90-day pause had a very specific time date stamp as to when it ends. These are where they are now. How long they will last could be a long time, could be a short time. It just depends on how the countries react and what conversations happen and what deals get done. But we will see. Will Japan stay at 15%? Maybe. Will Bangladesh stay at 20%? I don't know. It's really, it is a bit of a roller coaster ride because nothing is set in stone forever here.
It sure is a roller coaster ride.
Okay. All right. I also want to just touch on Made in the USA and just share a bit of information. So people will ask, well, okay, my product's made in the USA. Does that affect me? And the answer is, well, maybe yes and maybe no. It's you need to do your homework again and know about, who's providing the product for the United States. But think of it this way. If I take my phone and and let's say this is made in the USA. Well, where are all the parts and components coming from? And if you're getting, a lot of parts and components from overseas, then there's a lot of questions to know because that technically made in the USA is defined by the Federal Trade Commission as all or virtually all made from materials produced in the United States. It's not an exact number, it's not an exact rate, it's all or virtually all, which is, has its own vague term to it. So I think that when you think about it, if a product is made and some parts and components are coming from outside, and there's an issue where, let's say, tariff rates are at 145% and someone doesn't want to ship, then I would argue, yes, that affects your product because the supply chain of bringing those parts and components are not there. And so that can affect it. So this is where if you're working with companies that are manufacturing in the United States, it's probably good to know, like, is this fully manufactured and all your parts and pieces are coming in, or are you relying on outside imports to bring them in? Just so you know, because this is all about understanding your risks and understanding your opportunities for that matter. Okay, so what have we been seeing since the start of this? And well, we've seen a lot of things, but if I had to kind of bucket it, I would say, companies are certainly looking at how do I optimize my duty costs? How do I try to have the lowest legal and ethical commercial invoice value for my products? Certainly going back to your factories, particularly overseas, and trying to negotiate to have them absorb some of these increases to make it more palatable. When we were at 145%, so many shipments were stopped. And then, we saw canceling of orders, we saw reductions of orders. That's really tricky depending on what happened and how far the production is done. And then what happened is when we got to the pause, when we went to from 145% to 30%, everybody wanted to rush. Rick, just for what you were saying below, because I've got to get this stuff out. I've got to get it through US Customs to make sure I'm only being charged the rate at the pause. And so that's when everybody started saying, I have to ship as quickly as possible. So, factories suddenly were kind of almost put on pause, and now they've got so much to do in such a short period of time. So we saw a lot of these things happening. Strategies for how to handle a situation like this. This is where I think, it can become very emotional. So it's really important to try to stay calm, work on the facts, determine what you need to know to make decisions, and how do you have that team put together. As we said, you certainly should be trying to work with your suppliers to determine what can I do, how can I lower the cost, and just negotiate straight on. But at the same time, I think you look at your product and you say, what are things that I can do to this product that don't compromise quality, integrity, functionality, but can help me with this that still provides a solid, viable product? The other thing to consider is you really need to look at what's happening with currency rates and what's happening with raw materials. Because depending on what's going on in supply and demand, there can be angles there if the currency rate is working to your advantage to renegotiate. If material pricing for raw materials are falling, renegotiate. When you start to see these trends, when we talk about what can you do to optimize your tariff rate, you're looking at, are you classifying it correctly? Are there other things that can be done? Really bringing in like the team that are experts to help you with that. And I think you have to also constantly be checking your tariff rates. These things change. And the last thing that you can consider, and there can be mixed feelings on this, is what's called delivered duty paid, referred to as DDP. And what that means is if we're thinking about a factory overseas, having them deliver it to your warehouse or to the end destination so that these tariff rates are applied to their cost and not your cost, and they pass on the savings. You can lose visibility. You don't have as much control over the logistics side, but that is an option that, companies are using. So these are just some quick short-term things you can think about in terms of how to manage this situation. But I think the real thing to be thinking about now in this environment is, how do I build resilience into my supply chain? And I would encourage everybody on this call to think about that, because right now I feel like we're playing a bit of supply chain roulette in this world. And so we encourage our clients to really consider diversifying production. If you're able to, if the volumes are there, don't just rely on one factory in one country of production. Look at nearshoring, look at reshoring if it makes sense. Look, and I know I keep coming back to this, but look at how to best optimize how you're classifying your product. And then this one, I want to take a second because it's very, very important. Think about what is a true country of origin. And by that, I mean you need to look at and do the homework on the product and understand not just where the product is shipping from. Let's take Southeast Asia, but where are the materials coming from that make that product? Because if you have a product that a high amount of the cost of the product is coming, let's say, from China, but you're shipping out of Vietnam, that doesn't mean that you can really feel confident in saying this is made in Vietnam. It could hit US Customs. US Customs could look at it and say, you know what? 70% of that product is from products made in China. So it truly is made in China, and you're going to get that rate. Or you're going to get, another country's rate, whatever it may be. So you really should be well aware of what that is and understand where you need to feel comfortable as to what constitutes being able to say the correct country of production. There isn't necessarily an exact number by country yet. Maybe in the future there will be, but right now each company should set where they feel they need to be, and that's what you should make sure you have. But it's not just about getting a cost anymore. It's about getting a cost and the breakdown of it in the bill of materials. All right, I've said a lot of things, and you may be swimming in all of these details. So I want to pull this back into four things and make this digestible. And I think if you forget everything, try to remember these four things. What are the key dates coming up? Well, one of them is past August 1st, where we know if you're importing in outside of China, but the next key date is now November 10th. That is when the pause ends of the 30% on the China tariffs. Now we'll see what it means. N doesn't mean it goes to zero. N means we'll get more clarity. Really consider diversifying your production to put more chips on the board if you can, so you have more flexibility and resilience in your supply chain. When you listen to the news, remember what it means for something to be official. Look for the executive orders, look for the Federal Register for that information. And really scrutinize, is the country I'm shipping from the country that legitimately is going to be considered the country of production, for as best as I can tell right now, when it's not always so perfectly black and white.
Well, Steve, that's that's great advice. I for one have a spinning head right now, but I think given everything that you've gone through here, it sounds like these doing your homework, working with your advisors. Could mean hundreds of thousands. It could mean millions. It could mean tens of millions of dollars in difference in terms of product costs, given the uncertainty there. So, thanks so much for doing. I'm sure you crammed about 3 hours of content into 30 minutes there, but appreciate you keeping on top of all this.
My pleasure.
I'm gonna, before handing it off to Ron to talk about some things that you can be doing with your existing suppliers, given everything that Steve's been talking about here. Most of the companies that we deal with at Growth Operators, these are mid-sized companies in the middle market. And, these are companies that are too big to be small, but too small to be big enough to have a staff, like I'm sure large multinational companies probably have a whole staff of people keeping current, like Steve on this building and rebuilding and tweaking strategies as it goes on. Most companies, most of our clients don't have that. And that's where we come in. We can bring that expertise into your business and certainly work with experts like Steve or your other advisors to really do the math as you build a real dynamic strategy on this. So happy to help you there. Steve, we can go on to the next slide. And I think, Ron, having known you now for over 20 years, during that time, you've been running businesses, importing products from overseas, everything from golf-related products to woodworking supplies to commodities like steel. What are some things that, the tricks of the trade, as they say, that you can pass along from your expertise on what folks should be doing here?
Well, thanks, Rick. If you can go to the next slide, Steve. I think a lot of that is as Steve had talked about, planning and being clear about what your expectations are. Taking a partner like Steve, in Flywheel, is very important. To Rick's point, the companies that I've been involved with would really be in that target range for growth operators in that lower middle market. And we didn't have a team of individuals that were doing the research. But tariffs have really become dynamic and, as Steve said, a major impact on your margins. Please go to the next slide. So we'll talk about some strategies and things that I've used that have worked for me in partnership with someone like a Steve and Flywheel. So next slide, please.
Ron, while we transition there, I love President Eisenhower's quote on the earlier slide. It's, and certainly in this environment when things are changing, any plan itself is useless, but planning is indispensable. And I think the key is don't wait, don't wait until the dust settles, because I think to Steve's point, we don't know when the dust is going to settle. So it's really never too early, even in a crazy dynamic environment like this, to start really putting pen to paper and saying, what if?
Yeah, that's a good point, Rick. And I think, if you can, as much as possible, look across the spectrum of possibility with tariffs. And, it's pretty schizophrenic right now. They go up, they go down, and being able to put your pen to paper and say, maybe there's products that we need to take out of the line currently, or there's other products, or as Steve talked about, materials that we can switch. All of those things are important as you look at, reducing the impact, or as we say, you de-risk and drive value. Not to become a victim. It's hard not to. You've done your negotiating, you've done your pricing, you've set your SG&A and all your other expenses, and now along comes a tariff that you didn't plan for. So how do you work around that? So we'll talk supplier relationship management, negotiation tactics, certainly dating and exchange rate, as Steve touched on, and then finally the contracts themselves. So next slide, please. So, the supplier relationship management, it's important to remember that your suppliers are in business too. And they want to partner with you, and they want to build that through relationship. It isn't an us versus them. The more you can work together with your suppliers, the better off you're both going to be. So it's time to really deepen that connection, make sure that you understand where their limitations are and that they understand what you can do. And then really, as much as possible, face-to-face meetings. So it's really about a relationship and not just a transaction. Next slide, please.
And as we do that, Ron, I think going back to Steve's dog toy example, you've got an 86% increase in, in your case, running businesses that are importing those products. And ultimately, does that 86% price increase get passed all the way through to the customer? That's probably not realistic. So who in the supply chain is all going to kind of hold hands and, take a little bit of the pain. So not all of it, rests on ultimately the end customer, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, that's real true. If you're not working to bring that cost down, then you are going to absorb all of it, and then that impacts the entire organization. That means fewer people you can have. It may be capital expenses that you don't invest in that you would have otherwise because cash is tight. So we talk about the value of physically visiting your suppliers. I don't think that there's ever been a time where I was able to get a better deal over the phone than I was sitting face to face. So my first piece of advice is get on a plane, take your flywheel partner with you. They've got boots on the ground. That's important to have someone that can translate for you, that understands the local business, and get to know your suppliers face to face. And then make sure that your objectives are clear, how much you plan to sell, what your budget looks like, how much you're going to import, what's the timing. You might be preparing for holiday, whatever, but you can get far enough out if you're physically there and you're looking at how does this partnership work to build both of our businesses. The other thing that those on-site visits, you do get a mutual trust, but you get to look at the product as it's being made. You might be able to make those material changes to product or enhancements to product while you're there. And there's never been a time that I've been on a supplier visit that I wasn't able to find an additional product to add to the arsenal. So it's a good time to see new products as well that they've been working on. Next slide, please. And then, from a negotiation standpoint, the first thing I would be doing today is maybe get into your agreement that whatever the tariff rate is, you're going to split it. It might be a 50-50, but get some sort of a tariff agreement with your supplier so that as the tariff continues to fluctuate up or down, that might fluctuate. That's going to impact your cost, but you're not going to take 100% of whatever that increased tariff would be. And then discounts on freight charges, that goes directly to your freight forwarder. And then incremental price adjustments. They might, you might take a price adjustment with who you're going to sell the product to. You're going to have to pass on some of it. And as Steve said, that's going to be reflected at retail. But if you don't have to pass on 100% because you've negotiated better payment terms, you've negotiated that tariff, that 83% is now shared, you impact your margins, and overall, you're going to have a much lower impact on your cost of goods. Next slide, please. And then extended dating. I think this is important, especially as Steve said, that price hits you once it's cleared customs. By extending your dating, that gives you time to make sure that you don't have an increased tariff before you actually take possession of the product. If you've got 30 days, it's typically 30 days on water. So it would also give you another 30 to 60 days that you could sell the product before you have to pay the bill. So it absolutely impacts your cash flow and allows you to hang on to the dollars that you've spent and possibly, like I said, actually enhance your margin a little bit by selling the product before it's due. Okay, next slide, please. And then exchange rate, Steve touched on this, and I've used a float in the past, and this really just helps internally. You're not constantly looking at the exchange rate. If you have it set that whatever the exchange rate is at the end of a quarter is the exchange rate that you're going to go with, it really doesn't hurt you. It doesn't hurt your supplier. And it's not, again, not another battle tactic that has to be negotiated every time that there's a change. So the float, I've used that, and I think it just kind of gets past that volatility, but also the administrative overhead that you have to go through, especially if you have a lot of SKUs that you're importing.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide, please. And then your contracts, you really need to make sure that all of these things are reflected in writing, not just with your suppliers, but also you're selling to. If you look at that last point, retailers typically require a 90-day notice before price increases. So that may be something that has to change. Originally, that was done because more around marketing. If they were doing print marketing with pricing, then it takes a while to get that print in place, and they needed that time in order to change pricing. More and more catalogs are going out without pricing, or they're referring you to the website for the current price. So that 90 days is negotiable. It allows you to also let them know that, hey, without negotiation, I might have to cut off your supply. And we've been through that before too, where, I've had a retailer that did not want to take the price increase, and we had a limited supply that allowed us to shift that supply to another retailer. And hey, it's a miracle. All of a sudden, they've agreed to the 90 days.
Well, Ron, great advice. A couple things that jump out for me that you mentioned are one, don't be a victim. As you can see, there's a lot that is fluid and dynamic here. And so, but rather than being a victim, there's certainly a bunch of different ways that you can get out there to mitigate the impact of tariffs. And the other thing that jumps out at me, Ron, is when you said you've never negotiated a better deal over the phone than you have face to face. And so I think it sounds like it'd be well worth the investment to have those face to faces, not just with your suppliers, but honestly with your customers as well. Because going back to the dog toy example, there's an 86% price increase that's got to be absorbed. And to the extent that you're sitting face to face with the folks that have to decide who's taking the hit for this, it's probably a better answer for you than sitting back and waiting for it to happen. So
Yeah.
I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what can you do now, kind of going back to the President Eisenhower quote, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So Steve, let's go on to the next slide here where really what you want to be able to do here is identify where the tipping point is. As if you were to look at in your tariff modeling, and if you don't have the capabilities to do that, that's certainly something we do at Growth Operators for our clients. Look at where tariffs are currently and look at how that impacts your existing business. It really gives you a starting point to say, what do I need to do? And really, where is that tipping point where it just simply becomes untenable for you to do nothing and work from there? But those are going to also then inform capital expenditure decisions, because if you just are faced with the reality that my product costs are going up and there's only so much I can do to mitigate it, then you start having to think about where can I save costs and expenses in the rest of the business, capital expenditure planning being one, and capital expenditures themselves, to the extent they're imported products, are going to have tariff implications. Those of you that have audited financial statements for whatever reason should be talking with your accounting firm about, are there any financial disclosures just given your supplier base that need to be made given this uncertainty? And last but not least, unfortunately, for most companies, the area where the only area where you can go to reduce costs is going to be in people. It tends to be one of the top expenses for companies, and so consider the human resources aspect of it, the employee aspect of it as well in doing that modeling and planning. Steve, we can go to the next slide, please. Tariff modeling tools, it's do the math. A lot of companies, at different SKU by SKU basis, your products are coming, you're sourcing from different locations. Ron talked about looking at your supplier base. Really recommend that you're doing this on a SKU by SKU basis, really to get a sense of what happens in this environment if I do nothing, and then looking at different mitigation scenarios. We can go to the next slide, please, Steve. With capital expenditures, looking at the return on investment, obviously those are going to be impacted if these expenditures are tariff exposed type items. And so again, it's requires a new analysis on, what assumptions do I, or what actions do I now need to take, given that the return on investment on these capital expenditures is changing, and plan ahead for that. Steve, next slide, please. The going concern and financial disclosures, as I mentioned briefly, in some cases, companies, it's going to have a significant impact on your financial stability, your obligations. What you don't want to happen is if you do nothing and you get into the spring and your auditors are auditing your financial statements and determine that there's what they would call in that profession a going concern. If the tariff impacts are significant enough where it could put you out of business within the next year, that's something that the auditors have to take into account, and could possibly, rather than issuing a clean audit opinion on your financials, say there actually is doubt that this company, unless things significantly change, or unless they have a good mitigation strategy in place, that they may go out of business. That's something that auditors are required to disclose if that risk exists. So don't wait for that to happen until beyond a time when you can do something about it. The time to really think about that is really now. Next slide, Steve. So finally, again, that tipping point I mentioned. When do the tariffs make products unprofitable? I mean, if we look at China as an example, somewhere in that 20-30% to 145% tariff, there may be a tipping point that says this just simply doesn't work. And really understanding where that is at least helps you then develop a worst case scenario plan, hoping that's not the one you need to execute, but at least you know what you need to do. We can go to the next slide, Steve. So let's not ignore the role of human resources. As I mentioned, employee costs, payroll costs tend to be one of the largest operating expenses for most of our clients. And so as you're thinking through this, don't forget that your employees are probably nervous as well. You don't want them nervous about, is the company going to make it through this or not? Clear communication strategies and involving your workforce, in training and different things that you can be doing, is really one of the best things that you can do. And if you don't have the ability to do that, human resources is an area of expertise for us here at Growth Operators. We're happy to help you with building and executing those strategies as well. Next slide, Steve. Restructuring considerations. Hopefully you don't have to get here, but some companies have such tariff exposure you may. This is something, again, to keep in mind as you're building your plan. Next slide, Steve. So one of the things that we're able to do, the industry really refers to it as decision intelligence. And, what it really means is, we're in building those models, we can build models that say, here's what the current state would be if the tariffs, don't change from where they are today. But decision intelligence really arms us to provide you a what if, and that can be if scenario A or B happens. There's even more sophisticated decision intelligence tools that we can use, leveraging AI or some modeling tools like Monte Carlo simulation that say, rather than scenario A and B and C, life doesn't work that way, business doesn't work that way. It really gives you a sense of, among thousands of different possible outcomes here, where is that tipping point? And that's the kind of number crunching that we can do for you, to arm you with the intelligence to make really educated decisions on this. as best as anybody can in light of all this uncertainty. Next slide, Steve. I think it's Ron. Ron mentioned don't be a victim, and I love this quote because there's really three types of people. There's those who make things happen. There's those who watch it happen, and then there's those who wonder what happened. Don't be in that last group. Don't be those among those that wait and don't take action. Because unfortunately, with things changing as quickly as they can, it can have a significant enough impact on your business where you may for it. So, that's an important call to action on it's not too early to start digging in and planning for this right now. Next. Steve, if you could go to the next slide, we're going to kind of wrap up the formal presentation part of the webinar here. So, but before we do and open it up for questions here, next steps, what should you be doing? It's again, take action, build a plan, build a dynamic plan, and immediately implement these strategies. And again, plans are useless. Planning is indispensable. You may find out a day or a week into that, well, we planned it that way because of this. Something changed, something new came out in the Federal Register. So that plan changes. But the key is knowing what you're going to do, knowing some things are definitely going to change. Create those strategic partnerships with the who. And when we say who, it's creating those strategic partnerships. It's getting on a plane. It's talking with your suppliers. It's talking with your customers. But then also, again, I kind of mentioned, somewhat flippantly, don't try this at home. But this is the time to really consult your experts, your attorneys. Ron and all the experience he's had in sourcing products. He's had a ton of experience, but he's always used a firm like Flywheel to really make sure. Ron's a smart guy, but it's as a CEO of a business, he didn't have time to keep up on all these developments. He certainly had the plan and executed the plan to mitigate the impact of when things change, but he didn't do that without experts. So keep those experts in mind. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions from the group. If you have a question, you want to type it in, you can simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. There's also a raise your hand option. If you want to raise your hand, we'll turn your mic on and you can ask the question verbally. So any questions from the folks on the webinar? Well, all right. Well, folks, really want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you're leaving with some clarity on the next steps you could and should be taking for navigating this tariff uncertainty with as much confidence as you're able to have, knowing things have changed, are changing, and will continue to change. But if any of you have any questions that you weren't able to answer, actually, I think Steve has a question here.
I just
Before
want
I
to
get there, if you don't, if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to Steve at Flywheel, Ron, or myself at Growth Operators. If you weren't able to ask a question or if one popped into your head after the end of the webinar here. But Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing that to keep in mind is that your competition is in this same environment. And every sword has two edges. As difficult and challenging as this may feel, and what Rick said about the tipping point, I think is just so important of understanding that. I think you also have to look at an advantage. How can I exceed and get in front of my competition in this type of environment by utilizing the right people around you and bringing those to the table so that you move fast, you have flexibility, and you can take advantage of a difficult situation.
Well, I think that's great advice. And as an added benefit for those of you that are on the call, keep an eye on your mailbox. You're going to receive, every one of you will be receiving a complimentary copy of Dan Sullivan's book. The book is called Who Not How, and it's a great read if you haven't read it. But really, we spent a lot of time today talking about various aspects of the how. Can you navigate this uncertainty in the tariff environment that we all collectively face? But don't do it alone. It's when there's as much potential financial impact on the table as there is by trying to do it alone. Oftentimes, the best thing that you can do is that's a wise time to invest in advice from experts in this area. And in most, if not all cases, those investments are going to have a real good ROI for you, and could be the difference between you navigating the current uncertainty successfully or with a lot of pain. So keep an eye on your mailboxes for the book, and we appreciate your time today, and have a great rest of your day.